All right, 8:30. So let's go ahead and get started. So yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're super thrilled to see such a great turnout for today's webinar, Protecting Student Data Privacy, Insider Tips from Edtech CISO. So my name's Andy Miller. I work on the product marketing team here at Turnitin, and I'll be your host today. And I'm super excited to have a very distinguished guest speaker who's also Turnitin's very own Chief Information Security Officer, Jack Roehrig, who you'll hear from in just a few. A couple webinar housekeeping items before we get started. So during today's webinar, all of your lines will be muted just to ensure that the recording is clean. But we do encourage your participation throughout today's session. So the best way to participate throughout today's session is actually insert your questions in the Q&A box. You'll see the little screenshot I have on the slide here. That's going to be at the bottom of your Zoom interface. So submit your questions as they come up in that Q&A box, and I'll be moderating that box throughout all the questions throughout today's webinar. Some will answer right on the spot, and then others will wait to the end of today's session and ensure that we have some ample time to talk through all of your questions. So we please do encourage you to submit questions as they come up, and yeah, send them at any time. And then finally, today's session will be recorded, so we'll send out the recording tomorrow in a follow-up email, and feel free to share that recording with your peers or your colleagues who weren't able to join us live today. So yeah, most of you are probably familiar with Turnitin, but for those of you who are not, just a couple quick facts about the company. So we're an Edtech company based in the Bay Area. Our headquarters are actually in Oakland, California. We were founded back in 1997. We do have offices worldwide, so everywhere from, we have big offices in Newcastle, UK, Melbourne, Australia, some different parts in North America, as well as South and Latin America as well. So definitely very global at this point. Wasn't the case back in 1997, but we've grown quite a bit. And really at Turnitin, we're really focused on empowering educators to help students really find their authentic voices and really do their best original work. Turnitin is used by more than 30 million students at 15,000 institutions in 150 countries around the world, and that number continues to grow. And finally, really the mission, or kind of our guiding star, is really ensuring the integrity of global education and research. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time in this COVID era. And now I'm going to kick it over to Jack to take it away. So Jack.
All right, buenos dias, ladies and gentlemen. I'm in Mexico right now, so if my connection drops at all, please excuse. I'm the CISO at Turnitin. I joined the company, I think about almost 3 years ago now. I joined September 5th, 2017. And it was my first venture into education technology. So prior to that, I worked for a company that did a lot of mergers and acquisitions. We had a very big breadth of portfolio of companies, healthcare, advertising, B2B media, social networking, all kinds of stuff, but not EdTech. So I have EdTech under my belt now, and I've learned some things. And there's a lot of interesting things I've discovered about education technology. So hopefully I'll be able to show you some of my tips and tricks and tell you a bit about what I've done over at Turnitin, show you some things to look out for, and leverage my expertise in a diverse set of companies to better help education technology and education as a whole. So today I want to cover privacy and security. These two things are very closely intertwined. Privacy and security are very different, but they're very dependent on one another. We cannot have privacy without security, and security is absolutely critical to handling privacy, but there's a lot more to privacy than just security. So I want to emphasize that though I am the CISO here at Turnitin, my expertise is beyond just security. It also includes privacy. And I'm very passionate about privacy, especially because I work for a company that handles incredibly sensitive data for quite a lot of people. So I'll show you what I've had to deal with. All right, let's talk about Turnitin. When I joined Turnitin, I thought, hey, it's a company for checking plagiarism. Cool, you know, it's just essays. People writing book reports on the Chronicles of Narnia. Easy stuff, right? That's not a big security risk. And then I realized what was really going on. Turnitin has a database that has had over 1.2 billion submissions, which is insanely huge. It's a massive, massive amount of data. And we index the internet. Now, I'm a huge search nerd. I've worked in search for quite a while. I actually index the internet myself with the Yossi node back home in California. I'm a big, big search geek. So when I found out that they were indexing, I was pretty happy about that. We have a big index. There's quite a few pages that we're indexing. We use that index, of course, to do similarity detection. And the data that is submitted to our database, you know, it's not essays about the Chronicles of Narnia, it's anything. It's anything that students want to submit. So I spent a lot of time in college. I pursued a great breadth of education. And in that breadth of education, I was tasked with writing essays and certain things that I had to submit that were extremely sensitive, things that I had a confidentiality agreement with my teacher to be just between the two of us. And that happens quite frequently, especially in certain disciplines. And those types of things are in our database. So yeah, we have the Chronicles of Narnia book report, but we also have, you know, personal stories about very sensitive things from students that they've disclosed to their teachers with this guarantee that it's going to be confidential. Now, one of the key things about Turnitin that I want to emphasize, because I'm going to sell Turnitin here obviously a little bit, but I'm passionate about Turnitin, so trust me, I'm genuine. We're a SaaS provider and people pay for us. So we don't have ads. And when I joined Turnitin and I had to work on the privacy program, you know, privacy is a very difficult thing to do if you are an ad-supported company, but we don't have ads. So it was actually not terribly difficult to handle privacy at Turnitin. And it's one of the reasons why I work at Turnitin, because we're an ethical company. And the fact that we're not ad-supported means that we can prioritize the privacy of our students, of our customers, of everybody. But we need strong data security and privacy practices because that data is extremely sensitive. So I know a bit about education from before I entered the workforce. When I was a much younger person, I know people receive bounties for doing this now, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I may or may not have hacked my way around schools, prospective schools that I was applying to. And I would do essentially penetration tests on school infrastructure. The school infrastructure is notoriously underfunded, and it was easy for me to break into things. I remember one of the sites I broke into, and if any of you from Berkeley, please don't hold this against me. I did report it. I didn't do anything malicious, but it was very easy for me to break into ls.berkeley.edu, which of course is their letters and sciences department website. It took me about 15 minutes using an external vulnerability back in the 90s, I believe. It was a while ago. Now, schools, as I mentioned, have huge amounts of infrastructure because they have so many computers that are used for research, for students to do work on, and infrastructure is a target for hackers because nowadays, especially, hackers are looking for compute power. They want to mine cryptocurrency, they want to build botnets, they want to expand their power. Not all hackers are evil, of course, but the evil ones are the ones that we're looking out against. And schools, unfortunately, are a target amongst the evil because if you don't have ethics and you need that infrastructure, you're going to target massive infrastructure, understaffed support, high bandwidth internet connections. I mean, they're a honeypot. And schools are so underfunded that they can't prioritize keeping their software updated. One of the things that I've had to do at Turnitin is create certain endpoints that support older legacy versions of TLS that are insecure because our customers are not funded enough to upgrade. Now, obviously that doesn't affect the security collaterally of our other customers, which is why I'm comfortable doing that. But it's just a sad state of affairs to think about. So in addition to all this, students locally at the schools also abuse the infrastructure. And I'll tell you a quick story. I went to a high school named Northgate High School, and I believe it was Bill Clinton, when he was president, he came and cut the ribbon on our brand new internet program. Very privileged to have gone to that school, and it's one of the reasons why I have so much experience with technology. That infrastructure degraded so quickly, it was unbelievable. The computers were abused. everything just fell in shambles very quickly because this, we built this massive infrastructure and it wasn't supported and the students abused it. I also was the administrator, the only administrator at Silicon Valley College before they were acquired. And it was a similar state of affairs, just constant abuse from students. And not enough, I was the only guy supporting the infrastructure, so it's obviously underfunded. So there's some unique things about EdTech that I love, and I have some good tips and tricks. This is kind of sad. This happens at hospitals too, but you can see the current state of affairs. Schools are being targeted. I'm not making this up. Look at this. Who targets a school for ransomware? Like, the schools don't have enough money to pay freaking ransoms. I've seen people do it too. Public institutions, of course, government institutions that are heavily funded, but schools are notorious for needing more and more money. And the fact that they're being targeted for ransomware is terrible, but it happens. And the types of people that want to hack into things, I'll tell you, a lot of smart kids that know how to hack things, they're also lazy in a good way, I think. But if they have too much moral flexibility, we'll call it, maybe they're lazy and too smart in a way where they're going to breach infrastructure to try and give themselves good grades rather than earn them. So data security and data privacy are different, as I mentioned earlier, and I want to talk about those distinctions. Securing data, it prevents data from being used for unintended purposes. It's like locking the door to your house. If someone's going to come into your house and read your diary or whatever, right? Like, so you have to have a lock on your door. So security, obviously keeping the hackers away, preventing data access, but it's also more than that. It's internal issues too. So data needs to be stored in a certain place, internal in the infrastructure, where certain people have access to it based on a legitimate need to have that access and not be accessed by just everybody at the company. So imagine that I work for a healthcare institution and I have a lot of PHI. I've done some HIPAA in the past, and PHI is, of course, one of the most sensitive types of data. That's patient health information. And if I gave that to everybody at the company, they might find one of their friends on there who has some disease or something like that, and violate their privacy in that way. So it's not just external perimeter security that we have to worry about. We have to worry about internal issues, or what's called segregation of duties and segregation of access. Data has to be consistent too. Now, this is a really key one for Turnitin. Imagine if I didn't enforce data consistency at Turnitin and we falsely accuse somebody of plagiarism. So imagine that, like, I matched, like I attributed someone's essay to somebody else and they submitted their essay to our database, and boom, they plagiarized even though they actually haven't. Their academic career is over. They're in all kinds of trouble. And the student, is probably fighting and frustrated. And the administrators will, it's Turnitin. We have an expectation of consistency, and you should, because I do maintain consistency. But if I didn't, I would be ruining lives. So the loss of data consistency, accuracy of data, these are all security related issues that aren't discussed very much when we talk to the security community, but are very important at financial institutions and are very important at EdTech institutions as well. Now, privacy is a little different. So there are companies that are extremely secure. Some of these companies offer, $1 million for a bug bounty, but they don't care about privacy. And there are a lot of new privacy regulations that are popping up. CCPA, relatively newish. GDPR is not new, but it is quite hyped, and it's great. It's very it's defined in a very vague way, but it obviously targets certain types of companies that are very secure, but that don't honor data privacy very much. And the reason why is typically because the data privacy is sacrificed for advertising revenue. So what is important to me, data privacy wise, at Turnitin, is first and foremost that I restrict the use of data to what we promised we're going to use it for, which is similarity detection. And if that changes, I need to get consent from the people who have submitted that data that I'm going to use it for a different purpose. I have over 1.2 billion submissions in my database. If you can imagine the types of things that we could do with that, the technology that could be developed, the machine learning, the artificial intelligence, there's so much that would be capable and so unethical to do because we've promised our customers we're not going to do that. So data privacy, of course, is not just a security thing, right? It's an ethical problem. Also, collecting data that only needs to be collected is key. This is a common theme with new privacy regulations. When I sign up for a Facebook account or whatever, they only ask me for the data that I need. To have on my Facebook wall. Honestly, I don't know how to use Facebook. If they ask me for my social security number, my driver's license number, things like that, that would be illegal for most privacy regulations. And Turnitin obviously doesn't request that either. But it's really critical to only collect the data you need to collect, because if you have a bunch of data in your system that you have no use for, you've just increased your risk for no reason. So you get hacked and you have sensitive data that you didn't even need. You suffer a public relations nightmare. Now, data confidentiality, I touched on before. This is both internal and external, right? It's very key at Turnitin, and I touched on this even earlier, because I believe people have an expectation of confidentiality when they enter their data in on the internet, right? I don't know if any of you ever entered a password into a forum and then received a confirmation email with that password in plain text. That is an interesting example of a lack of data confidentiality and a lack of data security. Data ownership is also something that Turnitin has battled in the past. And by battled in the past, I mean battled the perception, because we do not retain intellectual property rights to data. But data ownership is this really common theme in data privacy regulations right now, where we used to talk about PII, whereas now we talk about personal data. And I think there's a really interesting example of the difference between PII and personal data. So a picture that I've taken of a friend or of someone's car or something like that, that's data that I own, and that's personal data. That's my personal data. It doesn't identify me in any way. But I have ownership of that under most privacy regulations. CCPA and GDPR both. And I have a right to tell companies to get rid of it. Obviously, students own their essays. They own the intellectual property rights to them, or under certain regulations, their schools do. And depending on that nuance, those people have a right to tell us to delete their data, and we do. So this is the next bullet here, I think is absolutely crucial, and is one of the biggest causes of privacy breach, not just in education technology, but in every industry, and that's third-party data processor security. I'll tell you a story about this later, maybe if you're interested, but one of the things that I do is approve every single vendor that Turnitin uses. And I started this as one of the earlier programs at Turnitin about 1.5 years ago. And I've since approved over 300 vendors. I've denied some too, of course. And the idea here is that if I'm going to send data of a certain sensitivity level to a vendor, I expect them to have privacy and security practices that are on par with our own or better. And some don't. Some do, most do, but there are some that don't. And it may cost us more money to operate the website because we might have to pay more money for a more secure data processor. But if we didn't, we would be extending our perimeter in a negligent way. So it's extremely important to vet third-party data processors, and most compliance initiatives do require people to do this. I'll tell you something interesting. I approve every vendor, data being sent to them or not. So I have approved. We have a Newcastle office, Newcastle in England, a very large Newcastle office with a bunch of tremendously qualified employees. And I had to approve their Kung Fu lessons, because apparently we offer Kung Fu lessons over there. And we also have an office in Utrecht, the Netherlands. And I had to approve, I believe it was chocolate Santa Claus gifts as a holiday treat. So I'm in front of everything. And then, of course, there's auditability, and that's keeping logs. This is a really interesting subject security-wise. If anybody has any questions about how to do this when you have the right to be forgotten, but you also have to have an audit trail, I'm happy to answer that. Post them in the question box if you're curious. So I touched on this earlier too, but I want to go into a little more detail. The ad-supported sites can be extremely secure, and I say questionable data privacy practices, but I can say negligent, I can say horrible, I can say unethical. I'm not going to mention any particular companies, but I'm sure you know who they are. And these companies have just the top of the line industry-leading security, but they have to make money off targeted ads, of all kinds of things. And so their data privacy practices are poor. Now, there's some companies that have really good privacy policies, and I've read them, and they have terrible security programs. And so I've actually been working in M&A for about a decade now, and part of M&A is what I call, I'm going to trademark this. This is my personal trademark: outside diligence. We have this inside diligence thing, right? And that's when you buy a company and you go and you vet them for their privacy, security practices. You interview their CTO and their CEO or whatever, right? But outside diligence is where you kind of like go around and check out their LinkedIn and see who works for the company, what they consider their titles to be. You might run some external scans against the company to see if they have any very severe, obvious security vulnerabilities. And having done this for quite a while, I've seen companies claim that they comply with public regulations like GDPR, but do not have security programs. And my inside diligence subsequent to the outside diligence has confirmed that. So I'll be very clear, GDPR is an abstractly defined regulation for which you cannot achieve a government certification, meaning that there are third parties that will attest to your compliance, staking their reputation, but there's no like government thing that you can get that says they necessarily are GDPR compliant. So a lot of people will say they're GDPR compliant and not be. I'd say most people will say that they're GDPR compliant, not be. GDPR has 7 key tenets, and one of those, of course, requires a very strict security program. Because if you care about data privacy and you just have the door wide open where people can just peep in and take a look at what they shouldn't be looking at, then obviously the data's not private. So some history at Turnitin. When I joined Turnitin, they wanted to reboot their security program. And like I said, I thought, Chronicles of Narnia essays, this is going to be cake. And the reason why I'm still here at Turnitin is because I realized it's much more of a challenge than I originally assumed. It's an awesome challenge. And it's also, it kind of makes you feel good, because we're talking about students and people like that whose data I'm protecting. So that's, and we're an ethical company. So I don't know, it's a feel-good job. I hate saying that, but it really is. So when I joined, I realized that government agencies were trusting us. I mean, we're not FedRAMP compliant, but that doesn't stop them. Government agencies are submitting confidential information to our database. We have corporations that are submitting medical research. If you've ever worked in the medical research industry, you know that there's a huge problem with plagiarism, and that companies need to vet for plagiarism before submitting FDA approval requests, things like that. And we offer products that do that, and it's all commingled with our data. So wow, I mean, this suddenly became a big thing. So the first thing I did when I joined was a SOC gap assessment. So they said they wanted to get their SOC compliance, and I said, oh great, give me some money, I'll hire a gap assessor, I'll hire an auditor or an audit firm. And I hired a boutique audit firm out of Orange County that worked very closely with us. They were very motivated to work with us. So it was a perfect fit. And I used that SOC audit as a way to motivate this huge shift in security culture at Turnitin. We implemented new policies. We bought software, SaaS services, all kinds of great stuff to improve security. And I would tell people, we're not going to pass our compliance unless we do this. Now, in reality, that wasn't true. If anybody from Turnitin is here, please don't hold that against me. But it's possible to pass audits without being fully compliant. But I wanted to actually use it as a way to bootstrap the security program. So we built a team, we delegated responsibilities, we changed the culture, and we are still doing it. I'm doing a remediation assessment right now for new SOC controls. I've been doing it for about 3-4 months, I'd say, since the shelter in place has started around there. And it demonstrates very clearly that security is an ongoing thing. Now, I know CISOs, I know too many of them. We all stick together. We're all a bunch of self-promoting jerks. But one thing I know that's true about CISOs is that we work at a company for an average of 2.4 years. And I've passed that mark, and hopefully I'll go way past that mark, because I think that Turnitin is one of these companies that's going to require a continued amount of attention to security, and that they're going to need continued investment, and I'm having fun doing that. So that's a key thing when you're worried about your company's security, is when you hire somebody to be in charge of that, what they typically do is they come in, they jumpstart security, they build a program, and they bounce, and they move to a different company so they can get more cash. It is absolutely critical that you have a 5 or 10-year risk mitigation plan for security rather than a 2.4-year plan. Now, some easy tips. This is amazing because security is so expensive. It costs so much money to hire a CISO, it costs so much money to hire a security engineer, but it's so cheap to go from like 0 to 65, 70%. I mean, that's a huge amount of risk mitigated for almost nothing. And the way to do that is awareness training. First and foremost, the biggest attack vector I have ever seen is social engineering. And awareness training is nothing. I know a young man named Theo who just started a company. It's called righthand.ai. I think it's right-hand.ai. And he is brilliant. He's building an amazing security awareness program, and it's inexpensive, and it has a huge impact on employees. One of the things that I like to do is send phishing emails out. I have every month I send at least one phishing scenario, and I've got a lot of great ones. If I ever need to, if I'm ever on hard times and I can't be a CISO, I could be a fisher for sure. But we just did one where we pretended that our CEO was in the Wall Street Journal, and we caught a lot of people. But ever since I've done the awareness training and the phishing campaigns, I am pinged constantly by employees who are working to be diligent to make sure that they are not doing anything wrong with security. And one of the ways that I encourage that is by telling them every single time they report something, even if it's BS, if it's nothing, I say, good for you. I say, great, thank you for reaching out to me. You're awesome. The diligence is amazing. I encourage it, positive reinforcement. And it costs almost nothing. And that's the same with scrutinizing third-party processors. That's almost free too. And that's another huge attack vector. Background checks, especially for employees who have access to your key data. That's huge. I worked for a company in the past that didn't do that effectively, and they sacrificed 100% of their profit because of a retaliatory attack by a former employee. They went from a profitable company to a company hemorrhaging money in 72 hours. Background checks are cheap. So are automatic updates in browsers and operating systems. Like, this is a no-brainer. When I do my phishing campaigns, I can see what if somebody's browser is out of date. And there's a couple key types of phishing emails. There's the ones with the attachments that have macro viruses, and they're the ones that direct you to websites that you enter your credentials into. And then there's what's called a drive-by. And a drive-by attack is where you just click on a link and there's no data input. But if you have an out-of-date browser, you could have got some malware installed, and then that malware could be used to install ransomware, to attack laterally. It's so easy for somebody to do a drive-by attack, and it's also so easy to prevent a drive-by attack by keeping software up to date. And the way you can do that is with the deployment of a centralized endpoint management system. So these are this is not technical stuff here. This is almost all corp IT security too. I could talk for days about host-based intrusion detection systems, vulnerability assessment and analysis, application security. These are very sophisticated methods of security, but they're expensive. And I know that we all work in education, and though Turnitin does use all of those systems, a lot of us can't afford to, or a lot of us need to start somewhere. And if we're not doing this, we should, because it's almost free. So this is some tips. Get that VSAC, Vendor Security Assessment Questionnaire. And I just request, hey, do you have a SIG-Lite? Do you have a HECVAT? Something they've already completed. I'm not going to give them my own security questionnaire. I don't even have one. I don't care. I just want to see them use a known standard. If they filled it out, then they're paying attention to security, even if their answers aren't very good. But that depends on the sensitivity of the data that they're processing for me, because if they're processing my student submissions, that's not going to fly. Then I'll look out for weasel words. So a great weasel word would be like, mostly, or almost all, or something like that, or in security, the way that people weasel is they'll use their corporate IT infrastructure as control evidence when we really care about their production infrastructure or their website infrastructure. LinkedIn. I mentioned this when I talked about M&A. Do they have a CISO? They do. That's awesome. I mean, that's a huge, huge leap in security because that shows that a disciplined executive level security program is in place. Make sure that that CISO is actually a CISO and they're not a person who is a consultant or something like that. We have a DevOps team, a Corp IT team. Those two things are critical. A DevOps team shows availability and operational discipline. And I also manage DevOps at Turnitin. That's one of my passions. And I love managing DevOps because it works very well with security and it makes it easier for me to get my stuff deployed. A Corp IT team, of course, especially one with 3, 4 or more employees, shows that they probably have some sort of endpoint discipline. And like I mentioned earlier, that's a huge attack vector. Now, certs, if somebody's obtained a SOC or an ISO 27001, something like that, then they have done a ton of work to be a secure company. I'll tell you from firsthand experience that both of those things are not easy to obtain. And if you request a report for them, and you can actually see exactly what they're doing. Now, I wouldn't trust it 100%. It's easy to weasel your way out of auditors, but ever since the Sarbox Act, if they have a CISO, that person is personally liable for lying on that report. And I do mean personally liable, and I do mean every company. It doesn't just apply to public companies. Public companies are audited for Sarbox ITGC, but Sarbox does apply to private companies as well. Check for relevant criteria. There are 5 criteria for SOC, for example. For Turnitin, we do availability, privacy, and security. Obviously, availability is important to us at Turnitin, but we don't target 5 nines because that would make our product insanely expensive. But I do like to have a disaster recovery strategy because it'd be terrible if our site were down for many days at a time. The type 2 SOC audit, of course, is a continuous audit, whereas type 1 is a point-in-time audit. A type 1 audit is very easy to obtain, and a type 2 is much more difficult. And penetration tests by third parties, make sure it's a reputable third party. Take a look at that pen test. Take a look at if they remediated things. If you request a pen test from me, I'll provide it under NDA in certain circumstances, but it is generally difficult to get that because I have to find a balance between proving to my customers that I'm secure and not giving people too much information about my security program so that it can be exploited and hurt my other customers. And take a look at removed controls on any audit. You can go and do independent research and say, well, wait a minute, these people passed 120 controls, but there's 135 controls. Why were those 15 removed? That's key. It's very easy for a CISO to say, well, that really doesn't apply to our business. Let's take that one out. And what they really mean a lot of the time is, well, there's no way we can comply with that. We got to get rid of that control. Sneaky answers. Now scrutinize that PCI. One of the interesting things with PCI compliance is that it can be domain-specific applications. So if you're worried about PCI, make sure that all domains and subdomains that you're using are within the scope of their PCI compliance. Data center certifications are a joke. Of course, your data center is SOC 2 compliant. I mean, unless you're co-located in your friend's garage, I can't imagine being even able to find a data center that's not SOC 2 compliant. That's a very weaselly thing because they're trying to imply that they're SOC 2 compliant. When I hear that from a vendor, I often tell them that they shouldn't tell me that because it makes me think less of them. Look at scope. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but you need to be concerned with the production infrastructure as a whole and the corporate infrastructure, and not just a subset of that. Not just, are we auditing the administrators of Active Directory or the people who have access to the administrator Okta. You should be looking at the people who have access to production, the data segregation, the developers. I mean, are keys rotated in production or are they just rotated in the corporate IT infrastructure? Very critical. Security hygiene is a good one too. It's an easy thing to do. And if companies are not doing it, it's an indication that they're not doing a whole lot of other stuff. Now, privacy practices are a little more difficult to vet. You can read the privacy policy. I've noticed that the easy to read privacy policies, those companies tend to actually care about privacy. I was working with finding a grammar checking browser plugin to use at Turnitin, because there are others that exist that are very insecure, that have been breached, and also some of those, might be our competitors. And so I was looking around and saying, I wonder if there's a privacy-friendly one. And I found one. I think it's called Language Tool. And I was reading the privacy and security policies, and I was like, wow, like these guys actually care about privacy. And it was pretty simple speak. It wasn't some big, long legalese thing that I couldn't understand. And I work in privacy, and I have for a long time. I was the DPO for a large internet conglomerate. And I don't understand a lot of these legal speak privacy policies, of course. And you need a team of lawyers to decode these things. So look for that simple English, because they'll bury bad stuff in that legal speak. That's why they're doing it. I mean, sure, the lawyers want to mitigate risk and eliminate liability, but if you don't have liability, you don't need to do that. And then rev sources are a big one too. If the product's free, then your information is what they're selling, right? So it's a pretty common thing. If you're using a free website, then you are the product. That's what people say, right? Social networks are notorious for this. You sign up for a social network for free, you interface with your friends, and I don't know, maybe your picture ends up on a billboard somewhere. Obviously that never happens, but there are other things that do happen. Your data is sold for all kinds of interesting purposes, and it could be sold to a third party who could interfere with the confidentiality of that data, or who could have a worse security program. And after working in advertising for over 10 years, I'll tell you the malvertising industry is huge. And I've posted a link to malvertising. I don't recall what that is, but don't worry about it. Probably get the deck from Andy later. Malvertising, it's like an industry. These people will buy ads on ad networks and crypto mine or install malware. It's like one of the common ways botnets are distributed. It's insane. So look out for those ad-supported companies. And then hit up their customer service team. Like, I mean, why not? Like, let's say I want to vet compliance, and I'll just submit something to their website and just submit a takedown request. It doesn't cost me almost anything. Hey, will you honor my right to be forgotten? And then maybe I'll ask them, okay, well, what are your privacy certs? And see how fast they respond. If they respond, if they don't respond and they say they're GDPR compliant, then they are not GDPR compliant. And it's such an easy test to run. Submit something, ask for a takedown. Okay. So in conclusion, schools they're a target, they're a honeypot. And I truly believe this, especially because when I was younger, I may or may not have targeted schools. I never did anything nefarious, of course, and I did report the issues. But nowadays, people are more nefarious, and there's a lot of money to be made by hacking. So in education technology, we're targets. Turnitin's a huge target. I do a dark web breach monitoring infrastructure. I've compiled my own 25 billion line breach database, and I have dark web monitoring to see if people are trying to do raids on Turnitin. We're a target. People don't like to submit their homework, so they'd rather give us a denial of service attack when it's due. And we have protections against that, of course. But we're a target, and data security, of course, is keeping the hackers away, but it's essential to breaking privacy rights. You can't do privacy without security. There's a ton of easy ways to go from 0 to like 70% risk mitigation and security that are cheap as heck. One of those things is to scrutinize your third parties, because that's attack perimeter expansion. And what I want to be first and foremost about, because of course I represent Turnitin, is that we are protecting both the privacy of our students, and we care very much about security. And I'm happy to, shoot answers to questions and stuff. I'm a busy dude, but if you have a pressing question and you shoot me an email, I'll prioritize it. I'll try and get you an answer. And if I can't answer it, maybe I'll point you in the direction of someone who can, or I'll just say, I don't know. But hit me up, jroehrig@turnitin.com.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Jack. That was a very informative and I feel very valuable session, just given kind of the landscape and, with more and more institutions moving, courses online. So yeah, we have about 20 minutes left. We don't have to use the full 20 minutes, but I just wanted to open it up for questions from any of our participants. So if you want to just put in your questions in the Q&A box, I'm happy to use the time to answer those now. One that I do see here, Jack, is what's the most outrageous VSAC you've ever seen?
Okay, I got a story. I got a dog fired. I got a dog fired. Not proud of that. Everybody loves dogs, and nobody wants to see them unemployed. But I was working internally. This is so silly. I was vetting the third-party data security, and I was requesting VSACs and all that. It was a very small startup. They're processing sensitive data, and I could not let them do that without providing me evidence. So they were providing me stuff, and it wasn't very good. And I went on their website, and they had their corporate executive page, you know, with everybody's headshot. And then they had their chief security officer. And I know what they meant, right? They meant like, you know, physical security, not like information security. But it was a picture of a dog. And so the guy who requested it internally to the company apparently was on the board of advisors for that company. I didn't know that. And I said, dude, come on, man. They have a dog as their CISO. And you know, stuff went around and whatever. And I went to re-vet them a year later. We had actually employed their services with a lot of restrictions to keep the data safe. And I went to re-vet and I looked on their website and it didn't work there anymore. I think they gave them the axe. And so, yeah, that keeps me up at night. Not proud of that. But in reality, what I do see a lot of VSAC-wise when people are asking questions about Turnitin is they send us cloud hosting provider VSACs that make no sense. That demonstrate a miscommunication between our customers and their IT department. And that's a more common thing that happens, is where we'll get a VSAC that's kind of inappropriate. And rather than try and fill that out, we'll just contact the institution and say, hey, you're probably more interested in this type of security, because I could just put not applicable to every box in this other VSAC.
Great, thanks for that, Jack. Great story. No other questions in the Q&A. I did see that Jelpesh Vasa did input something, but I'm just not following your question. So if you wanted to type that in, or anyone else want to type the question in the Q&A box, happy to answer your questions. So we'll give it a couple minutes, see if anyone had some questions. And if not, I think we can wrap up early today. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to, put them in the next minute or two. That'd be great. Alrighty, well, I'm not seeing any questions, so I don't want to hold you guys up. I just want to take the time to, again, thank you all for coming today. We know your time is valuable, so we really appreciate you spending, the last 45 minutes with us. And again, I will be sending out the recording out tomorrow, so feel free to, share that around with your colleagues. And we hope you found today's session valuable. And yeah, thanks so much. And I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much, Jack. Really appreciate it.
Hey, awesome. It was fun to be here, and thank you all for joining. I mean it. If you have questions, hit me up. I'm happy to answer. Roehrig@turnitin.com.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.